Patty Cunning, estoy con este grupo Madres de Mando Acción.
Every day, 100 Americans are shot and killed, and hundreds more are wounded. The impact of gun violence goes beyond mass shootings. Every kind of gun violence has devastated communities across the country in recent weeks. In Baltimore, Chicago, Gilroy, El Paso, Dayton, and here at home, we've seen shootings recently in Albuquerque, Rio Rancho, and Santa Fe.
Qué tristeza más grande sentimos por la gente de El Paso, ¿no? Nuestros vecinos, nuestros amigos, y no se tiene que hacer así. Hay maneras muy sencillas para evitar la violencia con las armas en este país.
Last March, New Mexico became the 21st state in the country to enact background checks for every kind of gun sale. It's now past time for all of our senators in Congress, and especially our Senate leadership, to listen to their constituents. We want a federal law to require background checks on every gun sale here in America, and we want a strong federal red flag bill. Today, we're here to remind our Senate that they need to take action.
To begin this rally, we'd like to share our statement of intention and purpose.
Our intention is to foster a real presence of diversity, equity, and inclusion of and for all individuals and groups who choose to join our efforts.
Our purpose is to work together to decrease gun violence and increase public safety for our state and for our nation. Through all of our activities, we value diversity, we advance equity, and we demonstrate inclusion as a community.
We are change makers, advocates coming together with survivors in partnership to work toward a future free from gun violence. To recognize the survivors among us today, I introduce our brave friend and Everytown Survivor Fellow, Robin Brule.
Hi. So first of all, thank you all for being here, and second of all, it breaks my heart that you all need to be here. And I want to shout out to our courageous leaders who have actually taken action around this issue. Michelle Lujan Grisham, Deb Haaland, Tim Keller, Maggie Toulouse Oliver, Patricia Roybal Caballero, and of course Senators Udall and Heinrich. We don't make change unless we elect politicians who are willing to make change. And these leaders all stood up and took action, honored their commitments, and are fighting every day to change the laws and policies that continue to hurt our lives. My name is Robin Brule, and I am so honored to be part of this important rally today. I want to also thank the fearless and courageous, amazing moms for all the work that they do each and every day. Without you, there is no change. I am a survivor of gun violence. On February 8, 2016, my mother and her friend were shot and killed. My mother was visiting her friend who had recently lost her husband. Strangers came into the house in the morning while they were reading the paper and drinking coffee. They were gunned down in cold blood and murdered. We later learned the killers obtained their guns on Craigslist. This is my mom. She was 5 foot, 75 years old, and weighed less than 100 pounds. She was murdered to get credit cards. This will never be easy for my family, and it will never make sense. There are days when it seems that the earth has shattered and time has stopped. My mother was Ruth Schwed, a beloved retired teacher in Albuquerque, a volunteer, as well as a loving mother, grandmother, and wife. But what also makes no sense to me is that our country continues to suffer from mass shootings and daily gun violence that take the lives of more than 90 people every single day and leave hundreds more injured. 3 years later, it is still completely unfathomable to me that my mother was shot and killed with a gun. It seems impossible to me that this happened to somebody I know, to me, to my family. At this moment, I want to take a moment to recognize all the survivors and anyone personally impacted by gun violence who is present here today. If you are comfortable, we ask that you raise your hand if you've been personally affected. I want to applaud you for being here today. We want to honor your action and your courage, sharing your stories. What has this done? We are here to prevent all of us, anybody else, from having to experience this pain we felt. There are too many of us. It was too many before Columbine. There was too many before Sandy Hook. There were too many before my mother's tragic death. It was too many before Parkland, and it was too many before the latest shootings in Dayton and El Paso. How many innocent souls will continue to be gunned down on a daily basis? Lives taken and lives forever changed. We cannot sit by and let this become our new normal. It's time to disarm hate, complacency, and indifference. This is not somebody else's problem. These are our neighbors, our aunts, our uncles, our nephews, our grandchildren, our mothers, our fathers, our community members. We should all be free to live without the fear of being shot. Once again, gun violence has torn apart the lives of Americans. We need to feel safe in our homes, our stores, in movie theaters, and schools. No one law can stop all gun violence, but there's so much more we must do to keep our families safe. The House of Representatives has already passed a bill to require background checks on all gun sales. Now, the Senate must act on background checks and pass a strong red flag law. I will tell you right now, I do not need their thoughts and prayers. I need their action for common sense legislation. We are here today to demand action from our elected officials. Hold our elected officials accountable. It is not acceptable that in some states it's easier to buy a gun than it is to get Sudafed. We are here, that's a real thing. It's unbelievable. We are here today to let our voice be heard. It's time for common sense laws that will protect our communities and our children. How much more devastation do we need to go through? When will enough be enough? I just want to share with you, I saw on the table today, these are postcards for the children in El Paso. Please fill this out. When you're a victim of gun violence, look at our country right now. Who cares? Who's doing anything? Who's speaking up on their behalf? Send them a note. Your hope is defiant. Please join me in fighting for federal legislation that requires a background check for all gun sales and a strong red flag bill. You know the best way to stop a guy with a gun? Millions of people like you with a vote and a voice. Join me today so that the future lives of so many will never be shattered with gun violence. I thank you and I honor you, and I want to thank you and a shout out to the politicians who have made a difference. Your voice, your actions are heard and felt. Thank you.
My name is Catherine Luker-Eaton, and I'm an advocate with Moms Demand Action. Once again, after yet another mass shooting, we're at a moment where we're prepared to do something, but we need everyone in Congress to listen to us because the vast majority of Americans support common sense gun legislation, which includes a background check, a federal background check on every single transaction of a firearm purchase. Why can't we get that done? Why can't we do that? If they represent us, why can't they do that? We're deeply grateful to Senators Udall and Heinrich for supporting common sense gun legislation. They're representing us well in Congress. And as one of hundreds of rallies happening across the United States today, Do Something rallies, we're here to remind our entire Senate that they all work for us. While the string of mass shootings has rallied a national outcry, what about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness? While the string of mass shootings has rallied a national outcry, the truth is that gun violence kills 100 people approximately in America every day. That is one mass shooting every single goddamn day. That's more than 36,000 per year and twice as many who are just wounded. That doesn't even take into account the ripple effects of trauma and violence from gun survivors and people close to those who have survived gun violence. This is shaping the lives of millions of people, including our children and students in our schools who witness it personally as victims and as potential victims waiting for the next mass shooting. In New Mexico, gun violence impacts every community. Firearms are now the leading cause of violent death in our state. 370 people per year. We have the 10th highest rate of gun-related deaths in the country. That's 53% higher than the national average. Assaults make up 26%, and suicide is now 2/3, 66% of those deaths. Domestic violence and guns are a lethal mix for our women and children. New Mexico has the 3rd leading rate of domestic violence homicides in the United States, the 3rd. And guns are now the 2nd leading cause of death for American children, which includes unintentional, accidental shootings that parents could prevent by a simple gun lock. Are you prepared to look at your children and know that gun violence is the leading cause of death for them and their friends? No.
Our next speaker is our Congresswoman Deb Haaland.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming together today to have a voice on why we need to do something about this gun violence. So, look. 3 people in Gilroy, Colorado, 9 in Ohio, 22 in El Paso, our neighbor. That is so close to us. And Chicago, Illinois, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and it can go on and on and on. 261 mass shootings this year alone. It's only August. What are we doing to our society? So I am here, first of all, to tell you that I voted for 2 background check bills. Yes, we voted back in February. We were sworn in January. We voted for those bills in February. Guess where they are? They're on Mitch McConnell's desk. They're on Mitch McConnell's desk, and he's not doing anything about it. You know why? Because he's beholden to the NRA. He's thinking of his own campaign before he thinks about people in this country who are dying because of guns. I think that's a simple thing to do. 2/3 of Americans believe that we need gun legislation. 2/3 of Americans want a ban on assault rifles. And I will tell you that I am an original co-sponsor on an assault rifle ban right now. When we get back to Washington, D.C. after our district work period, in September, I hope they come up. I hope they come up to the floor soon enough. I will vote yes on that. because we don't need that many guns. We don't need military-grade guns or assault weapons or semi-automatic, whatever they are. We don't need them on our streets. We don't need them available for people to break into people's houses and steal those guns or to buy them on Craigslist or whatever it is. So I am here to tell you that I am with you all the way. I promise. I promise you I am with you all the way. My nephew was a victim of gun violence. He got shot 8 times when he was 14 years old in Phoenix, Arizona. He was shot 8 times in a drive-by shooting. He lived. He lived. He was in the hospital for over a year, and his poor mother sat every single day by his bedside until he was able to walk again. I know just the agony and the terror, because I saw it in my cousin's face when she was sitting there with her son. Nobody should go through that. And I'm so sorry for everyone here or anyone here who has lost somebody to gun violence. That should never happen. And I'm so sorry that you've had to experience that. I want to tell you to keep it up. I want to say, and I like the Mitch McConnell signs all around here, right? Ditch Mitch. Hey, I'm with you. Now, if you tried to call his office, the mailbox is probably full. If you tried to email him, you probably couldn't because you don't have his Kentucky zip code. But I think you should all snail mail him so that he just keeps getting mail that says, put the bills up for a vote. That's what we need to do. I am ready to make a change in our country. I am ready to put an end to gun violence, to put an end to mass shootings, to put an end to hate. So thank you all so much for coming out today. Keep up the good work. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Deb. Our next speaker is Albuquerque's Mayor, Tim Keller.
Good morning, Albuquerque. Good morning. All right. I've asked a couple of important people in our city to be here with us today, and they were more than happy to. I'm going to speak about them in a little bit, but let's give a round of applause for our Chief of Police. Yeah. That's right. For all APD does to keep us safe each and every day, and for his leadership on this issue. And of course, our Chief Administrative Officer, Sarita Nair, another champion for all things gun violence. Now, I think hearing the words of our Congresswoman and also hearing the stories that we heard earlier, I really want to speak to the higher level challenge that we are facing. And in many ways, all of those examples that we mentioned, El Paso, Columbine, everything in between, they unfortunately are rippling throughout our society in ways now that even go beyond gun violence. They are dividing us. They are creating fear amongst huge swaths of our city. Hundreds of millions across our country are afraid now because of the connection between guns and racism and hate. This is a challenge that we have to address with the same courage that our Congresswoman Deb Haaland mentioned. And for us, even right here as a city, I know that when we think about the fact that for our town, I joined 250 mayors from across the country, a bipartisan group, with that same singular message: do something. Please do something. And I want to thank those and our representatives who have done something. They have voted, they have stood up. But we have to have the rest of the country do the same. Now for us though, as Robin mentioned, we know that unfortunately signing letters, hugging our children, mine out on the playground, are not enough. It's not enough. This has to be about action. And when it comes to action, that also means understanding what we can do locally. And I know that right here, we tend to forget these things because they have become, unfortunately, all too common. But it was just in the last 5 years, we've had 27 gun offenses at community centers and health service centers in our city. We know that at Alamosa Community Center, Sonny Reza was shot and killed just 6 years ago, an innocent child, an 8-year-old. This also affects us everywhere we go publicly in our lives. And so for us, I want to remind people that we have to help and support and push and cajole our state legislature, because in New Mexico, the very statutes that bind us together as a state, our very constitution, prohibits, it does not allow the cities to actually make choices with respect to gun violence. This is something that only really Western cities have, this notion that the state will not let the city do what the city feels is right. It ties my hands. It hampers everything that we try and do that we want to do, to be a role model city when it comes to gun violence. But we are forbidden legally to do that. So when you see those representatives, when you see those state senators, remind them that is where this fight has to take place in our state and in our city because of that issue. Now, I mention that because I also want to say this. We are committed, the three of us and everyone else at the city of Albuquerque and in our administration, we are committed to doing what we can despite that. Because we are going to take action, and we're going to do it in a way that is legal and in a way that sets the bar for every other city in the state of New Mexico. And so for us, while I know we have heard courage from everyone who's here today, we need to give that courage, to inspire that courage to all of these other elected officials who are afraid to stand up to the hate and the division and the rhetoric and the fear of losing their own election, of the advocacy groups that will attack them, of the challenging conversations they're going to have in the supermarket. I'm ready. I had one this morning at Lowe's about this issue right here. Thank you. Which is why I haven't polished up my speech. But it went something like this. I talked about keeping our children safe. I talked about how there is a big difference between Second Amendment rights and keeping our children safe and our schools safe. And there are all sorts of things like gun locks that we give out for free at our gun buyback programs, and all sorts of things that we can do to understand and respect the concept of that without putting hundreds of our children at risk, or without putting our own families at risk. And so I want you to look at a couple of things. First, the community center right there, Domingo Baca. We all know, even in the state of New Mexico, by law, by statute, that you cannot take a firearm into a school. Does this sound like common sense gun legislation? Yeah. It is, and we already have it. But can you take loaded semi-automatic weapon and walk right into that community center? The same educational programming, the same kids, literally, who are in the school up the street, you can. That's totally legal right now. Until this moment. Because we are going to step up and we are going to ban firearms from our community centers and our health centers right here with each and every one of you to make that statement and to take action. All right, so you're going to have to bear with us because this is actually real. So to the point that we're not just writing letters, we're actually going to sign this administrative action. And to make sure that everyone else knows what we're doing, we are also signing a letter telling everyone that we're taking this administrative action. And the letter, by the way, is to Mitch McConnell.
I'll go with you.
Thank you.
You are welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to take action. So I want to wrap up really with this. We hope we are demonstrating that we are going to do all that we can do. But I want to talk about domestic terrorism just a little bit and the broader issue of safety in our communities. And that's why I especially am grateful that our chief is here with us today. On Monday, we are going to be going through all of the different programs to keep us safe. And we'll be going through these in a very detailed fashion for all of the city of Albuquerque and anyone else who's interested to give us ideas, but to also learn for how our department is doing everything we can to work with our partners, even at the FBI, at UNM, at APS, to do the gun ballistics tracking program called NIBINS, and to develop this notion of hardening targets. All of these are things that we unfortunately have to learn about. And we are going to educate our population, our city, about it on Monday. Now, this also means IDing potential threats. It does mean looking at mental illness and behavioral health challenges associated with weapons. It does mean looking at felons who are carrying firearms and having those warrants and making those arrests. It also means even things like our fire department and our community centers, understanding how to deal with community risk reduction, stop the bleeding, and dealing with aftercare situations, which are so unfortunate but absolutely critical in these incidents. So I want to encourage folks to take note of that on Monday. And also I want to hope that we have inspired other cities to follow our lead, that we have inspired others to find a way, even if it's a small way, to take some sort of action, even if it's just getting a gun lock. Any action we can take matters. That's what today is all about. And I believe that together in this city, we should walk without fear. We are not afraid of people who disagree with us. We are not afraid of finding common ground, and we are not afraid of taking action. Thank you so much for being here today and being a part of walking without fear. Thank you so much.
We have a great mayor, or what? Fantastic. That is the kind of action we want to see. Next up, we have Michelle Kavanaugh. She's a representative from Senator Tom Udall's office.
How can I possibly follow that? One more round of applause for our incredible mayor. I have a statement for you from Senator Udall, who wanted to be here but unfortunately was unable to. He says, "Thank you for being here today. 2 weeks ago, over 30 people were taken from us in El Paso and Dayton, and over 50 people wounded. A few days later, in Chicago, another gun situation, and 6 police officers shot in Philadelphia. News of these atrocities, one in our own backyard, is shocking, saddening, and enraging. Slain were mothers, fathers, grandparents, young people in the prime of their lives, children. Each of them was torn from this world, from their families and communities, too soon. It is long past time for action to combat the epidemic of gun violence that is tearing apart our communities, and we must devote our full attention to also fighting the white supremacism and white nationalism terrorizing our country. The attack on El Paso was an act of hatred and of evil. It is incumbent upon all of our leaders to identify, denounce, and take action to combat this vile white nationalist ideology. And the federal government must do more to root out white supremacist domestic terrorism. Today, I stand with you in demanding an end to gun violence. That is why I have co-sponsored the House-passed Background Check Expansion Act, and I support the bill to close the Charleston loophole and extend the time to allow for a background check from 3 days to 10. And I support action to ban weapons of war from our communities. Senate Majority Leader McConnell should immediately bring the Senate back in session to vote on this common sense, House-passed measure to slow the tide of gun violence in this nation. The American people, including gun owners, support gun safety measures. But the National Rifle Association's decades-old stranglehold on the Republican Party has prevented any action from being taken. We must break this stranglehold and demand solutions now. And President Trump needs to drop his offensive suggestion that we pair action on gun violence with immigration restrictions or other parts of his anti-immigrant agenda. The mere suggestion validates the hateful ideology that drove the El Paso attack, and it implies that immigrants are somehow to blame for this white supremacist violence. And the president needs to step up. He needs to take responsibility and acknowledge his own role in stoking the forces of hatred and bigotry in this country. He needs to stop trafficking in hate, and at the same time, he needs to show that he'll stand up to the NRA. 2 weeks later, we still grieve the terrible losses in El Paso and Dayton, Gilroy, Chicago, Philadelphia, for our own community in Albuquerque, and for our nation. But today, tomorrow, and in the next days, we must honor the slain and wounded and their families by recommitting to do all we can to bring an end to gun violence in America. Thank you to each of you for coming out this morning, standing up and fighting to protect our children and our communities. I will do all I can in Congress to stop gun violence in America as well. We stand together, and we will make sure they hear us. Thank you. Tom Udall, United States Senate.
Fantastic, Michelle. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is from Senator Martin Heinrich's office, Alex Eubanks.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming together today. Senator wishes he could be here. Unfortunately, he was unable to attend, but he did ask that I read this statement today. Today, we continue to mourn the passing of 34 lives taken in El Paso, Dayton, and Gilroy. My heart is with these families as our nation grieves for their loss. El Paso was deliberately targeted for its minority community. Hate has no place in America. We pride ourselves on diversity. We cannot have a president telling Americans that asylum seekers are criminals, predominantly black cities are disgusting, and minority members of Congress to go back where they came from. This language encourages violence and emboldens white supremacists. On average, 91 Americans are killed daily by gun violence. That's why earlier this year I introduced legislation to expand federal background checks to all gun sales, and why I strongly support red flag legislation. I also believe we must ban magazines like the 100-round drum that killed 9 in Dayton just in 30 seconds. Congress passed similar legislation in 1994 that expired in 2004. Our country is infuriated. Congress has not taken action to prevent gun violence. As a father of 2 young boys who believes there needs to be changes in our gun laws, I will get on a plane back to Washington in a heartbeat if Senator Mitch McConnell is willing to put any bill on the floor to address this issue. The time is now to push aside special interests and pass common sense legislation. The majority of Americans demand action now to stop this epidemic. My sincere thanks to Moms Demand Action for today's rally and remembering the innocent lost to gun violence. Sincerely, Martin Heinrich, United States Senator.
Fantastic. Our next speaker is our Secretary of State, Maggie Toulouse Oliver.
Hi, everybody. So, a few of you may have heard that I am running for the United States Senate. We've been talking about that body a lot today, but that's not why I'm here today. First and foremost, I'm here today because I am a mom who demands action. My sons are 21 and 9 years old, and they are growing up in a society where literally every time they leave the house, they and I have to worry about their safety, and that is not okay. That is not the America I grew up in, and I refuse to let this be the America that they grow up in. Secondly, I am also here today as a survivor of gun violence. In the summer of 2002, my home was invaded in the middle of the night. I was kidnapped and sexually assaulted at gunpoint. No one should ever have to experience that. And for those of you here who are survivors today or who know survivors, Thank you for being here and standing strong against the scourge of gun violence in this country. You know, the problem is that too many of our leaders in Washington, D.C. do not understand the effect that this is having on our daily lives here in this country. And we need more people in Washington who will do something about this. But there's something that we can all do. And I am here today, first and foremost, as your Secretary of State. I am proud to serve as your Secretary of State. And right now, I am actually fighting against the push to prevent common sense gun control laws. Here in our own state, we passed common sense gun control legislation in the legislative session, and our governor signed that bill. And now a small minority group of people have decided that they want to put your right to be safe from gun violence up to a vote. And that is not okay. No. We elected our representatives to do what's right for us. And now they're suing me because I told them no. Yeah. Let's fight them. Yeah. Let's make sure that the Supreme Court hears our voices and does not give them the right to put our lives, our safety, and our well-being up for a vote. That's right. However, there's something really important that is up for a vote coming up in 2020. And those are our representatives in Washington, D.C. and across the state. Each and every one of us here today, except for maybe a few people that are too young to do it, can get registered if we're not. And I cannot imagine anybody here is not registered, but if you're not, please do not leave here today without getting registered to vote. There is a booth right over there. Yeah. Secondly, go to the polls. Make your voice heard. Vote for leaders who are going to make sure that your right to, what did she say, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is guaranteed. Make sure that we continue to send people to the State House and to Washington, D.C. who are going to do that, who are going to stand up against the gun lobby, going to stand up against the NRA, going to fight to get the horrible influence of money and politics out of our elections so that we never again have to have another El Paso, another Sandy Hook, another Parkland. That's what we need, and it starts with each and every one of you in that voting booth, and not just each and every one of you, but your neighbors, your friends, your brothers, sisters, colleagues, cousins, sons, daughters, mothers, fathers. Get them out to vote too. That's what we can do. That's the action that each of us can take. And I am counting on each and every one of you to do that with me. Next November, we're going to kick them out. Thank you.
How are you guys feeling about New Mexico's leadership right now? It's going to get better because now we have Representative Patricia Roybal Caballero.
That's a good thing. You want to get something done?
Thank you. Moms Demand Action, and all advocates against gun violence. I come before you today as a mother, grandmother, lawmaker, together with my sisters and brothers from the immigrant, migrant, refugee, indigenous, and advocacy communities, in unity and in sorrow. We grieve, yes, but we are more resolute in our pursuit of justice. I would like to ask all of you to repeat after me the word presente as a show in solidarity of those who have fallen to the recent hate-filled gun violence in El Paso and Dayton, and to affirm their presence amongst us today in our pledge to them to value and honor their lives through our actions in fighting for social justice. When I raise my hand, please state presente. En el nombre de cada persona que perdió su vida en Dayton y en la masacre en El Paso, presente. En el nombre de cada persona que ha sufrido la trauma del racismo, presente. En el nombre de cada persona que se ha dedicado a la justicia social, presente. Y yo, hoy, en solidaridad con los presentes, yo digo, ya basta, ya basta, ya basta con el odio, ya basta con el racismo, ya basta con el sufrimiento de nuestros niños y familias inmigrantes, migrantes y los que buscan el refugio. I have lived a life of trauma associated with discrimination and racism, and have been a target all of my life because of the color of my skin. Growing up in the borderlands of El Paso and Las Cruces, I know what it is like to have a Border Patrol agent stop and ask you, "Where were you born?" I answer, "In El Paso, Texas." And they follow, "Are you a U.S. citizen?" And I answer, "I always thought El Paso, Texas was the United States of America." Then, being further intimidated, interrogated, and harassed by the same Border Patrol agent, he states, "You know, I can arrest you for verbal assault, for being a wise mouth. You want to keep it up? Test me." I've marched, I've rallied, I've picketed, I've been beaten up and arrested for representing and defending myself and others from discrimination and racist attacks just because we are immigrants, migrants, persons of color, poor, disenfranchised, LGBTQ, and just because. I've lost dear friends, shot, blown up, and murdered, and others jailed and imprisoned because we dared to stand up against racism, disparities, inequities, and injustices, and failed policies meant only for the privileged to be used against the defenseless. And most recently, we've stood strong with all of you to call out the hate-filled fear-mongering of Trump and his invader, colonizer, white supremacist mentality and actions which are inciting gun violence targeted at communities of color. So I dare anyone, especially Donald Trump, to tell me, "Be quiet," or "Go back where you came from," or "Calm down," or "Go easy on them." Now, more than ever, with such overt, intentional, planned, and targeted violence and hate perpetrated against our communities, I will not stand down. I will stand up. I will not be quiet. I will be louder. I decry the use of guns against the innocent. I decry the use of guns against the defenseless. I decry the use of guns in the hands of perpetrators and hate-filled killers. I decry the use of guns without universal background checks. I call for the Senate to take action now and to protect the safety, good, and welfare of our communities against further rage in gun violence. We deserve to live without fear of being shot. And I demand my constitutional right to be protected and defended. As a woman of color, as an older woman of color, as a Chicana, as a Piro Manso Tiwa Pueblo, and as the daughter of a 3-war veteran, POW, Green Beret Special Forces warrior, as an immigrant, as a migrant and refugee. I have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are my constitutional rights, all of which Trump Second Amendment any day. Ya basta. Arriba con la paz y la justicia. Que vivan las moms demand action. Que viva El Paso y Dayton. Que viva Ciudad Juárez. Que viva México y las Américas. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. Gracias, gracias.
Benedict Donald will not change. We need to vote him out. Better yet, impeach. Humiliate him at the polls.
That is truth to power. Next, I'd like to introduce Regina, who was raised in Morelos and is now a longtime resident of Los Griegos. She will tell you her story of gun violence.
My name is Regina Griego. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I was born and raised. Me llamo Regina Griego. Yo soy de Albuquerque y mi familia viene de aquí hace 4,000 años, o 400 años. This story is about a perfect storm. The storm that took 5 of my family members, all victims of gun violence. The call came around 1 a.m. that mid-January Sunday morning. Auntie Gina, is it true? Is my dad and the family dead? It was my niece from California who had seen a Facebook post about the shootings. That night happened 6.5 years ago, and it changed my life forever. I am a wife, a mother, and a grandmother. I am a retired engineer and an aspiring writer. Now I speak out for common sense gun laws. My brother Greg and his family were dedicated church members, and Greg had even served as a pastor prior to his death. The family went everywhere together. My favorite memory of my brother was at our family gatherings when he and my younger brother would joke and laugh. Greg had a deep, barking laugh with a silly grin and a sparkle in his eyes. I feel heavy and a sense of overwhelming loss, not only for my brother and his family, but for our extended family. I also feel a loss of innocence. I wish I had been more vigilant about what was happening in my brother's household, including the fact that he kept guns that were not securely stored, guns purposely bought through private sale without background checks. We had a difficult growing up. Greg was drawn to violence as a young adult until he became an active part of his church, eventually serving in leadership. However, he continued to keep guns and had extreme beliefs about the government. He also had a 15-year-old son that was struggling. He had an arsenal of 6 weapons, 2 AR-15 or the like, and over 15,000 rounds of ammunition, all of it unsecured. My heart weeps every time I think of the loss of my brother Greg, my sister-in-law, and their 3 precious children. There were signs of a family in distress, and we didn't see them or didn't pay attention. I am convinced that without easy access to these firearms, my family members would be alive today. My strength comes from my faith and the love that I have for my brother and the family in general. That love helps me to act on the family's behalf and to advocate for change in our society. We should not lose children this way. We should not lose families this way. We are the adults. No debemos perder nuestros hijos en esta manera. Tenemos poder. We have power. We need our lawmakers to support common sense gun laws that could prevent tragedies like what happened to my family. The U.S. Senate has failed to take action, even as their colleagues in the House have passed bipartisan, sensible gun safety legislation. The root cause of gun violence in this country is easy access to firearms. We need to keep guns out of the hands of those who should not have them. That is the adult thing to do. Our 116th Congress represents the voice of the people, and 93% of voters support requiring background checks on all gun sales. Extreme risk protection and red flag laws provide another tool to temporarily stop people from possessing firearms in cases where they are at risk of harming themselves or others. I urge you to take action, to call U.S. Senate members requesting they support the bill that requires background checks on all gun sales, and to consider legislation on red flag laws as well. Por favor, te pido una acción. Mande un mensaje de texto con la palabra checks al 64433 para conectar a sus senadores y suplicar a tomar medidas sobre la ley de verificación de antecedentes y la ley bandera roja nacional. Si usted tiene la oportunidad de decir sola una cosa, todos tenemos el derecho a vivir sin temor de ser víctimas de la violencia con armas de fuego. Ninguna ley puede acabar con toda la violencia con armas de fuego, pero hay mucho más que podemos hacer para mantener a nuestras familias seguras. Please take the simple action of texting checks to 64433 and you will be connected to your senator. No single law can stop violence with guns, but we can do much more. I can tell you that the ripple effect of violence with guns is devastating. And we have to stop destroying families and communities this way. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Javier Benavides. He's a community organizer with Albuquerque Interfaith.
Good morning, and to the Griego family, I really express my respect and love. There's a network of us who've been through experiences like this, who support each other, and should any of you ever have to go through this, know that we're here. So I hope it's okay if I read my speech. This is kind of a point of vulnerability for me. But to start off, I'm a community organizer with Albuquerque Interfaith. We do relational and institutional organizing, so it's based in a deep connection with personal stories and struggles and what we call cold anger at what tends to be the system's refusal to budge on things like gun control. Our focus is on lifting up the power of organized people over the power of organized money. And yeah, that's you all. In this case, and obviously our opponents are the NRA. But there's also a deeper side to this. And I want to talk for a minute about our brothers and sisters in El Paso. You all probably heard the El Paso Miracle. They are one of the safest cities in America. They only had 23 murders in 2018 compared to our 66. And then 2 Saturdays ago, right around this time, 10:40 a.m., that number was doubled in a couple of minutes by a 21-year-old white male who shot and killed 22 human beings and injured 24, all to provide an incentive for Latinos to return to their home countries, thus dissolving the Hispanic voting bloc in the U.S. Those are his words. The real-life consequences of that hate speech and that young shooter's access to an AK-47 continue to hollow me out, I'm sure they hollow you all out. I'm sure you remember the feelings of seeing the news notifications trickle out, getting worse and worse each hour, popping up on our phones. But as with all mass shootings, the news eventually dies down, the cameras leave. But the grief of those affected personally by this does not dissipate that easily. So our partner organization in El Paso, it's called EPISO, it's El Paso Interreligious Sponsoring Organization, has been gathering the people of El Paso together, 300 at a time, to do what we as organizers call house meetings. It's basically creating the sacred space in small group conversations to talk about questions that are as simple, and this is what they used in El Paso. They said, how are you? ¿Cómo estás? What do you need? What does your family need? ¿Qué es lo que necesita tu familia? And of course, out of those conversations, many elected officials were on hand. And together, through the Texas Industrial Area Foundation, which is kind of our national affiliate, they're going to pursue legislation to ban assault rifles, universal background checks, red flag alerts, etc. But they also want to identify state emergency resources for counseling in schools and strategies to reassure immigrant families and their children that they're safe accessing services like this, like counseling, that can help with the trauma of the collateral damage of gun violence. And that's what I want to dig into today, because the grief left behind by each of these shootings needs our attention too. I personally lost someone very special to me to a gun, my twin brother Mario, who took his own life with a gun on January 30th, 2014. He had fallen into a rapid downward spiral deep into the black hole of heroin addiction. And even though I talked to him 2 days earlier and he was hopeful, he was ready to take it on, if he could just get into the Turquoise Lodge, if we could just find some way to bump up his space on the waiting list, he was ready. He was hopeful, he was determined. And then we lost touch with him. Sorry, I just lost my space here. I was actually up at the state legislature when I got the call. And the long ride back to Albuquerque on a frigid, dusty day was the closest I think I've experienced to hell. Mario had been staying with a friend who had a gun buried deep in his closet in a case, wasn't locked up. I still have no idea why this guy had a gun. He didn't need it. And one bullet was all it took. He had my brother actually left the instructions for the gun unfolded because he didn't know how to work a gun. Or load it. I think because he never really shot a gun before. So with that, 35 years of growing up alongside my best friend was over. Mario left behind his wife Sylvia, his 3 young daughters, Neilani, who's 6, Giada, who was 4, and Melania, who was 2. So as you can see, talking about this makes it hard to breathe. I never dreamed of growing old without my brother, but I always appreciate the people who are willing to talk with me through the tears. And that's healing, so don't be afraid. That's one of the things that we deal with is, this is not the stuff you talk about in everyday conversations, but it's real. The American Psychiatric Association ranks the trauma of losing a loved one to suicide as catastrophic, on par with that of a concentration camp experience because of its complexity. And after all the shock, the grief, the denial, the sadness, the guilt, the anger, the stigma, the judgment, the blame, the person you love being the same person that murdered the person you love, all you can do is strive to let go of the why. and realize that a satisfying explanation just may not exist. There are more suicides in the US than homicides. It's about double. And if we can confront our gun problem, we can bring those numbers down.
Yeah.
Life is beautiful. I deeply miss my brother and his all-loving presence. He'll always be a deep part of me, and I know he'll be there to come get me when it's my time. But until then, I pledge, along with you all, to do everything I can to reverse this evil gun culture and its very human consequences. Gracias.
I went to Pius with Javier and his family. I didn't know. Our next speaker is Samia Assad. She is a human rights activist and organizer here in Albuquerque.
Does that bring you back to the reality of gun violence? Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Samia Assad. I'm an activist and organizer. I wear many hats. I know many of you on the streets, part of the Peace Center, part of the Women's March, and I'm the mother of 9, grandmother to 3. I'm a Muslim American. I have faced the fear of guns pointed at my children. I have lost an uncle who was shot. I know all too well the power of violence over a community that is oppressed day in, day out. I've seen it overseas. I've seen weapons of mass destruction destroy communities. And here in the streets of a vibrant democracy, we still want to be a vibrant democracy, right? We must have the courage, the will to fight this enemy of ours. It is an enemy. It is an enemy of democracy. I have to tell you, this is not the first space I've talked about violence or mass shootings. I'm getting sick of how many times I have to get up and talk about it. I connect the dots, as we all should, to mass shootings of the Muslim community in New Zealand, to the mass shootings in Norway, to the mass shootings in Quebec, to Charlottesville, to the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, to El Paso, our neighbors. It's too close to us. It's too close to us. As a mother of 9, I've had the gut-wrenching fear every time we get a call from APS saying there's been a false alarm of a threat of a kid going into to shoot up the school. Here at La Cueva or at Eisenhower. Heart dropped, but it's the reality of America right now. I think when we want to tackle gun violence, everybody that came up on the stage here exhibited that there's a will. The tools are there to counter gun violence, to control gun legislation. It's there. It's up to the will of and the power of Americans to wake up out of their apathy, to get up and speak, to get up and vote. I mean, like we're in a sleep. Everybody, if it doesn't affect you, you go about your daily life and nobody wants to look at what's happening next door. Because you're not the Muslim, you're not the immigrant, you're not the black, you're not a woman who suffers from domestic violence. It's time for America to take the conversations home to your kitchen tables and talk about white supremacy, to talk about patriarchy, to talk about how it trickles down in our actions and how we raise our sons. Gun violence is about power. Gun ownership is about power. It's power over. Let's not steer away from that conversation. Second Amendment right? Are you kidding me? You need a weapon of mass destruction to feel that you're free? That's what it is. That's what it is. It is weapons of mass destruction pointed at civilian populations, at our children, at our mothers. So let's not forget that, and let's make an honest attempt in each of our spaces to have those conversations. I facilitate community conversations. I've seen how transformative those conversations are. It is the most empowering feeling you could have to face everything in front of you. We vote, we must vote, and we're gonna vote out Trump, by the way. The NRA, you know, I'm part of Women's March, and my sister's here for Moms Demand Action. It's gonna take women to do it. We're gonna take it down. And we'll take on Mitch. Whoever wants to go with me to his office, let's hook it up. We're gonna find him and hold him accountable. No more will we lay low. We're not gonna be passive to this kind of power and this kind of divide that's come over our country. You can't have a president telling 2 congressional women, sit down, go back home. You elect me as an American, as one of you. I'm telling the community as a Palestinian American right today, I have every right to say what I want to say. I have every right to get up and say, I don't agree with your policies. I stand against white supremacy. I stand against gun violence. And I have the right to free speech. And you hold that sacred. Sacred like you hold your kids at night. Because you lose that. You lose everything you stand for in a democracy. I just thank you with those words. Thank you so much.